Jessica's hand snatched the pie. "Don't tell me you traveled all those hours with that," she sneered, her nose wrinkling. Disgust was clear on her perfectly made-up face. Helen recoiled, the canvas bag suddenly seeming pathetic. "It's Mikey's favorite. His grandmother's recipe." Jessica let out a sharp, joyless laugh. "Michael doesn't eat this junk anymore. His diet is gluten-free, sugar-free, and free of whatever is surely in that." Before Helen could react, Jessica strode to the stainless steel trash can. She stepped on the pedal. The lid popped open, and, without a hint of hesitation, she threw the pie inside. The sound of the pie, tender and full of love from 2 days of hard work, hitting the bottom of the bin was louder to Helen than a scream. "We don't eat garbage here, ma'am," Jessica said, pulling a disinfectant wipe to clean her hands, as if she'd touched something filthy. "Let's see if this cures you of the habit of bringing your country things to my house." Helen stood frozen. She had crossed half the country to see her son, only to watch her love get thrown out along with vegetable peels. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. The houses were silent fortresses, estates with high walls and security cameras that stared at her like soulless eyes. Hers, her son Michael's, was the most imposing of all. A black wrought-iron gate, as tall as a giant, stood before her, sealing off a world she could barely imagine. In her right hand, she tightly clutched a canvas bag she had sewn herself, and inside, carefully wrapped in an embroidered cloth, was the treasure she had spent 2 days preparing. The apple pie, her grandmother's recipe, her son's favorite since he was a boy. The smell of butter and home escaped slightly, a humble aroma amidst the air thick with the perfume of expensive gardens. She timidly approached the intercom, a modern, metallic device she had never used. She hesitated for a moment, mentally rehearsing the words she had practiced. Should she say her name or simply that she was Michael's mother? The thought that a stranger might not believe her made her stomach churn. Before she could decide, a metallic, emotionless voice resonated from the device. "Yes? Who is it?" "Good afternoon," Helen began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for Mr. Michael. I'm his mom." There was a long silence, so heavy that Helen thought the connection had been lost. She could hear the hum of a Tesla passing on the street, a sound that accentuated her feeling of being out of place. The pie in her bag suddenly seemed like a foolish offering, a rustic and ridiculous object. One moment, the dry, curt voice finally said. The weight felt eternal. She leaned her back against the cold wall, feeling the afternoon sun warm the back of her neck. She imagined Michael running to open the gate for her with that wide smile that hadn't changed since childhood. She would hug him tightly, give him the pie, and he would lead her inside, proudly introducing her to his wife, Jessica. She only knew her daughter-in-law from photographs and from the brief and increasingly infrequent phone calls. In the photos, Jessica was a woman of icy beauty, with eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they looked at. Michael always said she was a strong woman, with character. Helen hoped with all her heart that she also had a good heart. The metallic screech of the gate startled her, but it wasn't Michael who appeared. A young woman dressed in an immaculate gray uniform opened it just enough to peek her head out. She looked Helen up and down, her gaze lingering on her worn shoes and the canvas bag. Her expression was a mixture of indifference and annoyance. "The missus says she wasn't expecting you," the employee said, without even a good afternoon. "Do you have an appointment?" Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "An appointment? I'm his mother. I came from New Mexico to surprise him." The employee sighed, as if Helen's mere existence were a monumental inconvenience. "Wait here." The gate closed again, leaving her on the sidewalk once more. Humiliation began to burn in her cheeks. How was it possible that the mother of the homeowner had to wait outside like a street vendor? The sun no longer felt warm, but heavy and hostile. The pie in her bag seemed to have lost all its aroma. Every minute that passed was a small stone, added to a growing burden of anguish in her chest. She could hear muffled voices on the other side of the wall, but she couldn't make out the words. Maybe they were arguing. Maybe Jessica didn't want her to come in. Fear, a sharp and shameful fear, began to eclipse her excitement. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the mansion's front door swung open, and there she was, Jessica. She was even taller and thinner than in the photos. She wore a sleek white dress, so tight it seemed sculpted onto her body, and heels that clicked on the stone pathway with insulting authority. Her black hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her face, made up with an artist's precision, showed not a hint of surprise or joy, only contempt, a pure, cold contempt, as sharp as a knife. "Can you tell me what you are doing here?" Jessica said, stopping several feet away, as if she were afraid of catching something. Helen tried to smile, a gesture that broke on her face. "Jessica, honey, I wanted to surprise Michael. I came to visit." Jessica let out a short, joyless laugh, an ugly, cutting sound. "A surprise, ma'am?" Surprises are announced with a call beforehand. Or in your town, do people just show up at others' doors as if it's nothing? Michael is in a very important meeting. He can't be disturbed. The ma'am was like a slap. Not Mom, not Helen, a ma'am that made her a stranger, a nobody. "I didn't mean to bother. I thought you'd be happy." "I brought Mikey his apple pie," she said, instinctively lifting the canvas bag like a peace flag. Jessica's eyes fixed on the bag with visible disgust. "Michael doesn't eat that kind of thing anymore. For God's sake, can't you see you don't fit in here? Look at your clothes, your shoes. You're going to track dirt all over the house." Jessica's words were like stones, and Helen's heart shrank into a painful fist. The floral print dress she had chosen so carefully, the one she thought was her prettiest, suddenly felt like a ridiculous costume. Her hands, calloused from decades of work on the farm and in the kitchen, seemed dirty and rough. "I just wanted to see my son," she murmured, her voice choked. Jessica rolled her eyes and sighed with theatrical impatience. "Look, you're already here. What can we do? I can't leave you on the street. People in this neighborhood are very nosy, and I don't want them to think we're savages. Go on, come in, but through the service entrance. I don't want the neighbors to see you and start asking questions." She gestured with her head toward a much narrower and less kept side path that led to the back of the house. The main path, the one leading to the imposing carved wooden door, was forbidden to her. The coldness of the house, Helen knew in that instant, was much greater than the coldness of the street. Jessica turned without waiting for her, her heels marking a furious rhythm on the stone. Every step was a declaration. "You don't belong here." Helen followed her in silence, her head bowed and the bag with the pie clutched against her chest. It was no longer a gift, it was a shield. As she passed the main entrance, she saw through the glass panels the interior of the mansion, a huge foyer with a chandelier that looked like a waterfall of diamonds and a marble floor so shiny it reflected light like a mirror. A world of wealth and coldness that she could only access through the back door, like the staff. The employee who had attended to her earlier was waiting by the service door with the same expressionless face. Jessica gave her a curt order. "Take her to the kitchen and make sure she cleans her shoes well before entering. And give her something to eat. She must be starving." Without another glance at her, Jessica disappeared down a hallway, leaving Helen alone with the employee. The air in the kitchen was thick and smelled of chemical cleaning products, not food. The employee, whose name Helen didn't know, pointed to a small chair in a corner. "Sit. Mrs. Jessica is in a bad mood today." Helen nodded, unable to speak. She sat on the edge of the chair, not daring to take up the whole space. She placed the bag with the pie on her lap. The journey had ended. The surprise had spoiled, and the visit, which had just begun, already felt like a sentence. The love that had driven her to cross half the country to see her son had run head-on into a door, a cold, metallic, and cruel door, which was not the one at the main gate, but the one in her daughter-in-law's eyes. The kitchen was a universe of stainless steel and gleaming white surfaces. It was larger than Helen's entire little house in New Mexico. There were appliances she had never seen, with buttons and lights that blinked silently. She felt like an intruder in a laboratory, a specimen from another world. The employee, a young woman named Lily, who had finally introduced herself in a low, timid voice, offered her a glass of water. Helen drank eagerly, realizing how thirsty the fear and tension had made her. "Would you like something to eat?" Lily asked, avoiding looking her directly in the eye, as if eye contact were forbidden. The missus said, "No, thank you, sweetie." "I'm fine," Helen interrupted, although her stomach was rumbling. I brought this for Mikey." With almost ceremonial care, she unwrapped the apple pie from the embroidered cloth. The sweet, comforting aroma filled a small part of the kitchen, an oasis of warmth amidst so much coldness. The pie was golden brown, with a slightly crisp crust and an interior that promised heavenly softness. It was the taste of her son's childhood, the reward after a hard day's work, the comfort in difficult times. "It's apple pie. My son loves it. Do you think I could give it to him?" Lily looked at the pie with genuine appreciation, a fleeting glint of longing in her eyes. "It looks delicious, ma'am, but Mr. Michael won't be home until late. And Mrs. Jessica, she doesn't like these things. She says it's peasant food." Just then, Jessica swept into the kitchen like a whirlwind. She held a tablet in her hand and was giving orders to someone on the phone, talking about figures Helen couldn't even conceive of. Her gaze fell on the pie Helen was holding. She ended the call abruptly. "What is that?" she asked, in the same tone someone would use upon finding an insect in their salad. It's apple pie for Michael," Helen replied, her voice barely a whisper. Jessica approached, not even touching it. She examined it from a safe distance, wrinkling her nose. "It smells like the country, like lard. Michael doesn't eat this junk anymore. His diet is strictly controlled by a nutritionist, gluten-free, sugar-free, free of everything that's surely in that." Without warning, she snatched the pie from her hands. For a moment, Helen thought she was going to taste it, that perhaps curiosity would overcome her contempt. But Jessica walked directly to the trash can, one of those metal bins that opened with a pedal. She stepped on it, the lid lifted, and without the slightest hesitation, she threw the pie inside. The sound of the pie, tender and full of love, hitting the bottom of the bin along with vegetable peels and leftovers, was more violent to Helen than a scream. "We don't eat garbage here, ma'am," Jessica said, wiping her hands with a disinfectant wipe she took from a drawer. "Let's see if this cures you of the habit of bringing your farm things to my house. Lily, take this trash out immediately. It stinks." She turned and left the kitchen, leaving a dense, painful silence. Helen stared at the trash can. She felt a knot in her stomach, a mixture of rage and a sadness so deep it was hard to breathe. 2 days of work, of kneading with her arthritic hands, of tending the wood-fired oven so it wouldn't burn, all her love, all her effort, thrown in the trash like waste. Lily approached, her eyes full of a compassion she dared not express in words. She took the black bag out of the bin and tied it. "Forgive her, ma'am. She's just like that." Helen could only nod. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to shed them. Not there, not in that woman's kitchen. Hours later, the house began to fill with life, but not the kind Helen was expecting. Expensive cars arrived, women in shimmering dresses and men in tailored suits. Jessica was hosting a dinner party. The sound of laughter and music filtered into the kitchen, where Helen remained seated in her invisible corner. Lily and other staff members moved with frantic efficiency, carrying trays of wine glasses and canapes with strange names. Jessica appeared at the kitchen door, her face transformed by a radiant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, you're still here," she said, as if she had forgotten her existence. "Well, since you are, you won't go without dinner. We saved you a place at the employees' table." She was referring to a small plastic table on the service patio, where the chauffeurs and security staff sometimes ate. Humiliation was a dish Jessica served cold and with cruel precision. Helen didn't have the strength to refuse. She ate in silence, surrounded by strangers who spoke in low voices, casting glances of curiosity and pity at her. But the torture wasn't over. In the middle of dinner, Jessica entered the kitchen with 2 of her friends, women who were equally thin and wore jewels that sparkled under the fluorescent light. They were laughing loudly at some joke. Jessica stopped when she saw Helen. Her smile widened, becoming predatory. "Look, girls, I want to introduce you to my new acquisition," she said loudly, making sure all the employees heard. I brought her directly from a little lost town in New Mexico. She's a wonderful cook, isn't she? She specializes in, what's the word? Rustic food. Her friends let out condescending giggles. Helen felt the blood rush to her head. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them who she was, that this house was built with the sweat her son had poured out, thanks to the sacrifices she had made. But Jessica's look was a warning, a challenge. "This is the new cook I hired from the country," Jessica continued, savoring every word. "She's still learning how to behave, you know, to use the right silverware, not to speak unless spoken to, but she has potential. Say hello to my friends, cook. What's your name?" Helen looked up. Her eyes met Jessica's, an abyss of malice. She felt the gazes of Lily and the other employees on her. She was trapped. If she told the truth, the scandal would be enormous, and her son, her Michael, would be in a terrible position. If she lied, she would be swallowing the poison her daughter-in-law was offering her. "Helen, at your service," she said in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. "Helen, what an authentic name," exclaimed one of the friends, as if talking about an exotic piece of handicraft. "They're not just insulting her, they are trying to erase her, turning a loving mother into a pet for their own amusement. How much more can one person take? This degradation is almost complete, but Jessica isn't done yet." Jessica smiled, satisfied. Her victory was total. She had managed not only to humiliate her, but to make her an accomplice in her own degradation. "Well, Helen, continue with your dinner. We have to get back to the guests, and please, make sure you wash the dishes well tonight. We have very fine china, and I wouldn't want a clumsy, country hand to spoil it." They left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and venom. Helen stared at her plate of food, but she was no longer hungry. The only taste in her mouth was that of humiliation, a bitter, metallic taste that felt like ashes, the taste of being a stranger in her own son's house. The next day, a heavy silence had settled over the mansion. Michael had left early, before Helen woke up in the small service room where they had put her. It was a clean but impersonal room, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto a concrete wall. There were no photos, no decorations, no trace of warmth. It was a room for someone who was meant to leave no trace. Jessica had assigned her light tasks so she wouldn't get bored. The first was to dust the library, a huge room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been touched. As she ran the feather duster over one of the lower shelves, her fingers stumbled upon something that wasn't a book. It was a photo album, an old one, with worn cardboard covers and its color faded by time. She recognized it instantly. It was the album she herself had put together with so much love over the years, the one she had given Michael when he moved to the city for college. Her heart skipped a beat. How had it ended up there? Hidden and forgotten. With trembling hands, she took it out and sat on the floor, hidden between the rows of books. She opened it, and the smell of old paper and memories transported her to another time. There was Michael at 5 years old, with a missing tooth and a mischievous grin, hugging the dog they had, Buddy. On another page, there he was in his first communion suit, too big for his skinny body, looking at her with a mixture of pride and nervousness. And there, the photo she loved most. Michael, now a teenager, helping her harvest corn, his face sweaty but his eyes full of a determination that already hinted at the man he would become. Helen caressed the images one by one. Each photograph was an anchor in the sea of her memory. It was tangible proof of her love, of her sacrifices. Those photos were the story of how she had turned a humble boy into the successful man he was now. She felt a pang of joy, a small ember of warmth in the icy cold of that house. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot Jessica, the humiliation, the pie in the trash. Only she and the memories of her son existed, the real Michael, her Mikey. "Can I ask what you're doing? I don't pay you to sit on the floor and laze around." Jessica's voice, sharp as broken glass, brought her back to reality with a jolt. She had approached silently. Her soft-soled shoes had made no noise on the carpet. Helen jumped up, frightened, trying to hide the album behind her back. I was cleaning and I found it. It's Michael's." Jessica looked at her with an icy fury. She snatched the album from her hands with a violent movement. "So, this is what this is about? You came to my house to fill his head with garbage from the past? To remind him that he comes from a miserable farm?" She opened it abruptly, flipping through the pages with contempt. She stopped at the photo of Michael in the cornfield. Look at him, skinny, dirty, with torn clothes. This is the image you want my husband to have of himself? That of a farmhand? That was a happy boy, a good son, Helen dared to say, her voice breaking. That boy is dead, Jessica shouted, her face contorted with hatred. Don't you get it? The man you see in those photos died. I created a new Michael. I polished him. I educated him. I taught him how to speak, how to dress, how to move in the right circles. I turned him into a king. And kings don't have mothers like you. Kings don't have a past of mud and misery. With deliberate cruelty, Jessica grabbed the photo of Michael in the cornfield and tore it in half. Then another, the one with the dog Buddy, and another. Helen let out a choked cry, as if her skin were being torn off in strips. No, please. Those are my memories. They are his life. His life began when he met me, Jessica retorted, throwing the pieces of the photos on the floor. Then she walked to a corner of the library where several cardboard boxes were stacked, filled with things destined to be donated or thrown away. She opened one and, without another thought, threw the entire album inside. The dull thud of the album falling on other objects was the sound of a door closing forever. First the pie, now her most precious memories. Jessica isn't just being cruel, she is systematically trying to annihilate Helen's entire past and her connection to Michael. What she does next, however, moves from psychological torment to physical abuse. Enough living in the past, she said, her tone venomous. It's over. There's no more Mikey. There is Mr. Michael Thompson, my husband, and you, in this house, are just part of the staff. Understood? Helen stood paralyzed, staring at the box where her treasure, the story of her life and her son's, lay desecrated and sentenced to disappear. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she couldn't control them. She wasn't crying for the photos. She was crying for the brutal truth of Jessica's words. They had stolen her son, transformed him into someone she barely recognized, and now they were even robbing her of the right to remember him as he was. Jessica approached her, her face inches from Helen's. Her voice dropped to a threatening hiss. Now pick up the pieces of trash you threw on the floor. And when you're done, go to the kitchen and help Lily polish the silverware. I want to see my reflection in every fork. Is that clear? Without waiting for an answer, she turned and left the library, leaving her alone with the remains of her memories scattered on the carpet. Helen knelt slowly. With trembling fingers, she picked up each piece of the torn photographs. Her son's smiling face was split in two. They were just pieces of paper, but to her, they were pieces of her soul. And her soul, in that house, was being systematically destroyed. The following days became a long, monotonous torture. Jessica had perfected the art of subtle humiliation, the kind that leaves no visible marks but shatters the spirit. She gave her contradictory orders and then blamed her for not following them. She criticized the way she cleaned, the way she walked, the way she breathed. Every morning, Helen woke up with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, wondering what new cruelty the day would bring. Michael remained a ghostly figure. He left before dawn and returned late at night when she was already locked in her room. The few times they crossed paths, he would give her a hurried kiss on the forehead and ask if everything was okay. And she, caught in Jessica's web of lies and terrified of the consequences of telling the truth, always answered, "Yes, my son, everything is fine." How could she explain that his wife, the woman he loved, treated her worse than an animal? How could she compete with Jessica's flawless performance, who in Michael's presence transformed into the sweetest, most considerate daughter-in-law? One afternoon, Jessica decided to take her sadistic game a step further. She was expecting some friends for tea in the main living room. The room was a museum of expensive, fragile objects. On a glass coffee table, right in the middle of the walkway, was a Chinese porcelain vase, a very tall and delicate piece that, according to Jessica, cost more than Helen's house in her town. "Helen," she called with a feigned sweetness that chilled her blood. "Could you wipe the floor in the living room with a damp cloth? It looks like one of the gardeners came in with dirty shoes. But be very careful, okay? Everything in here is very delicate, especially you." It was a trap. Helen knew it the moment she saw the vase's position. It was placed in such a way that it was almost impossible to pass by without brushing against it. She approached with extreme care, moving at a snail's pace. She held the cloth in one hand and steadied herself on the furniture with the other. She could feel Jessica's gaze fixed on the back of her neck, waiting for the disaster. And the disaster happened. It wasn't a hard hit. It was a minimal, almost imperceptible brush of her hip against the glass table. The table wobbled for a fraction of a second. It was enough. The vase swayed, lost its center of gravity, and crashed to the floor with a noise that seemed to shake the entire house. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. Jessica brought her hands to her mouth in a perfectly rehearsed gesture of horror. Just then, her friends were coming through the front door. The timing was perfect. "Oh my God, my vase. It was a family heirloom from my grandmother," Jessica cried, running towards the porcelain shards with crocodile tears in her eyes. Her friends surrounded her, consoling her. "What happened, Jessica, dear?" Jessica lifted her head and pointed an accusing finger at Helen. Helen was paralyzed, pale, the cloth still in her hand. "It was her. This woman. I warned her. I told her to be careful, but she's so clumsy, so useless. She destroyed the only thing of sentimental value I had from my family." Helen tried to speak, to defend herself, to say it was an accident, that the vase had been placed there precariously on purpose, but the words wouldn't come out. She was being judged and sentenced before a tribunal of wealthy women who looked at her as if she were a piece of dirt. "Oh, Jessica, don't worry. I'm sure it can be replaced," one of them said dismissively. "No, it can't," Jessica sobbed. "But it's not the money that hurts me. It's the lack of respect, the ingratitude. I open the doors of my home to her, and this is how she repays me." Then she turned to Helen, her face transformed by a mask of fury and pain. "And now you're going to clean this up, every single piece, on your knees. I want you to feel in your hands what you have done." She forced Helen to kneel on the cold marble floor. She didn't give her gloves or a dustpan. She demanded that she pick up the sharp fragments with her bare hands. The friends watched the scene, somewhere between uncomfortable and fascinated by the drama. "Come on, move it. Or are you deaf as well as clumsy?" Jessica snapped. With her soul in pieces, Helen began to pick up the shards. Each fragment was a reminder of her powerlessness. The porcelain was fine and sharp as razor blades. As she picked up a particularly sharp piece, she couldn't help it, and got a deep cut on the palm of her hand. The blood welled up, red and thick, mixing with the white dust of the broken porcelain. A sharp pain shot up her arm, but it was nothing compared to the pain she felt in her heart. She let out a small whimper. Jessica saw it. "What is it now? Did you hurt yourself? Perfect. Now you'll stain my Persian rug with blood too." She walked over and looked at her with contempt. "You're useless. On top of being poor, you're a disaster. You're nothing more than a servant disguised as a mother. A servant disguised as a mother." The words echoed in the room, cruel and indelible. Helen didn't look up. She kept staring at her injured hand. The blood mixed with her silent tears that fell on the remains of the vase. The cut was deep. The wound was bleeding, but the biggest wound was not in her hand. It was in her dignity, and that, she feared, would never stop bleeding. This was never an accident. It was a deliberate trap, set to inflict both physical pain and public shame. Forcing Helen to her knees like this is a new low, but Jessica is already planning her next move to isolate Helen completely. Jessica, satisfied with the public humiliation, finally called for Lily to finish cleaning up and ordered Helen to go to the kitchen to tend to her clumsiness. As she limped away, her knees aching and clutching her bleeding hand, Helen heard Jessica say to her friends with a victim's sigh, "Come on, girls, let's go to the garden." The atmosphere in here has become so unpleasant. The days following the destruction of the photo album were a descent into a hell of silence. Michael remained a ghost, and Helen's spirit, already bruised, felt shattered. The destruction of her memories was a cruelty far deeper than the insults or the discarded pie. She felt the humiliation from the library not as a sharp pain, but as a deep, cold ache. Lily, the young employee, found her crying silently in the kitchen, her hands raw from scrubbing. Lily, seeing the old woman's profound despair, approached her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. Without a word, she offered Helen a clean cloth and a glass of water. That small gesture of humanity, the first she had received in days, was like a glass of water in the middle of the desert. Helen felt a warmth in her chest that wasn't from a fever but from gratitude. She squeezed the young woman's arm, a wordless communication that said everything. It was that spark of kindness, combined with the desperation from the loss of her album, that pushed her to make a decision. She couldn't go on like this. She had to talk to Michael. She had to make him understand, somehow, what she was going through. She knew it would be difficult, almost impossible, but the instinct for survival and a mother's love were stronger than fear. She waited until the afternoon when Jessica left for one of her charity meetings, which were nothing more than excuses to show off her wealth. Helen approached Lily, who was cleaning vegetables for dinner. Shame burned her face for having to ask a favor that put the only person who had been kind to her at risk. "Lily, honey, I need to ask you for something very big," she began, her voice trembling. Lily looked at her, her young face already marked by worry. She seemed to guess what was coming. "You have a phone? One that the missus doesn't check?" Lily turned pale. She looked around as if the stainless steel walls could have ears. "Ma'am, you shouldn't. If she finds out." I know, my child. I know I'm asking a lot, but I can't take it anymore. I feel like I'm drowning. I just need to talk to my son for a minute, to hear his voice, to know he still exists. Please." The anguish in Helen's voice was so palpable, so real, that it broke through Lily's barriers of fear. The young woman sighed, a total surrender to the old woman's suffering. She took an old cell phone with a cracked screen from her apron pocket. "Here. But let me watch the entrance. If I see her car coming, I'll snatch it back. Talk fast, for goodness sake." Helen took the device with trembling hands. Michael's number was the only one she knew by heart. She dialed the digits, and with each ring, her heart beat faster. 1, 2, 3 rings. She thought he wouldn't answer. Just as she was about to hang up, she heard his voice. "Hello, who's this?" Michael said in a rushed, businesslike tone. "My son. It's me. It's Mom." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Helen could hear the murmur of other voices, the rustling of papers. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you calling me from this number? I'm in the middle of a very important meeting. I'm sorry, son. I know you're busy. I just wanted to know how you were. I haven't really seen you. I'm fine, Mom. I'm perfect, just very busy. Is something wrong? Is Jessica treating you well? Do you need anything?" The question hit her. Did she need anything? She needed everything. She needed him to rescue her, to hug her, to defend her. But how to say it? How to begin to unravel Jessica's web of lies over the phone in a rushed, stolen call? "No, son. She is very attentive. It's just that. I miss you." Her voice broke. The words got stuck in her throat, a ball of anguish and loneliness. She couldn't tell him the truth. Not like this. She would sound like a whining old woman, a jealous and resentful mother, exactly what Jessica wanted her to seem like. "Mom, this really isn't a good time. We can talk later tonight. When I get home, I'll come find you." "Yes, I promise I'll find you. I have to go now." Before Helen could reply, the call ended. The silence of the phone was like a door slammed in her face. She stared at the black screen, feeling her last hopes fading away. The promise of "I'll find you tonight" sounded empty, a formality to end the call. He wouldn't look for her. Jessica would make sure of that. She didn't realize she was no longer alone in the kitchen. Behind her, silent as a panther, Jessica had appeared. She hadn't arrived in her car. She had come back in a taxi so as not to make noise. There was no surprise on her face, only the cold confirmation of a suspicion. There was a twisted smile on her lips, a grimace of sadistic triumph. Well, well. So the little country mouse learned how to use a phone. Helen jumped, almost dropping the cell phone. Lily, who was at the door, turned white as a sheet. I just wanted to say hello to him," Helen stammered. Jessica advanced slowly, circling her like a predator. "Say hello to him, or fill his head with poison. Tell him lies, play the victim so he feels guilty? I know your kind of people very well." She stopped in front of Lily, who was trembling from head to toe. She snatched the phone from her hands with restrained violence. "And you," she said to the young woman, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You, the quiet one, the traitor. I thought you were loyal. I thought you understood the rules of my house." "Ma'am, please, I didn't want to." "She begged me," Lily whimpered, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "She begged you? And who pays your salary? Her or me? Who gives you a roof and food? This useless old woman or me?" Jessica raised her hand, and for a second, Helen thought she was going to strike her, but instead, she pointed a finger at her. "You're fired. Right now. Pack your junk and get out of my house. And don't even think about asking me for a letter of recommendation, because the only thing I'll write on it is that you're a thief and a traitor. I'll personally make sure you never get a job in this town again." Lily's crying turned into a heartbreaking sob. She fell to her knees, begging, "No, Mrs. Jessica, please. My mother is sick. I need the job. I beg you. I'll do whatever you want. What I want is for you to disappear from my sight," Jessica said, unmoved. She called one of the security guards on the kitchen intercom. "Come to the kitchen. We have some trash to take out." Then she turned to Helen, who watched the scene with a horror that had left her speechless. Jessica's face was a mask of pure evil. She leaned in until her eyes were level with the old woman's. "Do you see? Do you see what you cause? Because of you, this poor devil is out on the street. Because of you, her sick mother might not have money for her medicine. This is the first lesson, mother-in-law. Learn it well. Every time you try to go over my head, every time you try to talk to him behind my back, the life of someone around you will be destroyed. The gardener, the pool cleaner, the chauffeur. I have a long list of people whose lives I can ruin, and I'll do it with a smile on my face, and the blame will be all yours." The guard arrived, and without asking questions, roughly pulled Lily up from the floor and began to escort her toward the exit. The young woman couldn't stop crying and looking at Helen with an expression of panic and reproach. Helen was left alone with Jessica in the silence of the kitchen. The weight of what had just happened crushed her. Not only had she failed in her attempt to contact her son, but she had destroyed the life of the only person who had shown her compassion. She felt dirty, contaminated by her daughter-in-law's evil. She was a monster who used others as weapons, and she, Helen, had put the weapon in her hand. The service door slammed shut with a sharp crack. The last hope had been cut off, and in its place, only an abyss of guilt and loneliness remained. This is the true face of a master manipulator. Jessica doesn't just attack her victim, she isolates them by destroying anyone who shows them a moment of kindness. Helen is now utterly alone, trapped in the lion's den, and the worst is yet to come. The days following Lily's dismissal were a descent into a hell of silence and isolation. Helen moved through the mansion like a ghost, carrying out the tasks Jessica assigned her through notes left on the kitchen table. She no longer spoke to her directly, treating her like an object, a piece of furniture that should be functional and, above all, invisible. Helen took refuge in her small room, a four-walled sanctuary that separated her from the rest of that icy house. She stopped trying to understand, to find logic in Jessica's cruelty. She only felt an immense emptiness, an apathy that stole her appetite and her will to get out of bed. Her only comfort were the few items she had brought with her from New Mexico: a small, worn Bible, a quilt handmade by her mother, and tucked away at the bottom of her suitcase like the greatest treasure, the blue dress. It was a simple dress, made of cotton fabric, without frills or luxuries, but she had sewn it herself, stitch by stitch, for Michael's wedding. She remembered the nights spent by the light of a kerosene lamp, her fingers aching, choosing the thread of the exact color of the sky in her hometown. Michael had gotten married in a quick civil ceremony in the city, and she hadn't been able to go, but she had worn it to the small party they organized in their town to celebrate, and she had felt like the proudest mother in the world. That dress was the last remnant of that happiness, the symbol of a time when her son still belonged to her. One afternoon, feeling that loneliness was suffocating her, she opened her suitcase and took it out. The fabric was a bit wrinkled from the journey, but it still held the scent of her home, an aroma of sun, earth, and hometown soap. She spread it out on the narrow bed, smoothing the wrinkles with her calloused hands. The deep blue of the dress was a defiance to the mansion's palette of grays and whites. She lifted it and held it against her chest, closing her eyes. For a moment, she could transport herself to her patio with its geraniums in pots and the sound of chickens. She could feel her son's hug, a sincere hug, not the hurried kiss he gave her now. The room door burst open without a prior knock, without warning. Jessica stood there, her arms crossed and an expression of disgust on her face. Her eyes immediately fixed on the blue dress. "What is that rag?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. Helen tried to hide the dress behind her, a futile and pathetic gesture. "It's mine. It's a memento." Jessica entered the room, invading Helen's small, personal space. She approached the dress and touched it with the tips of 2 fingers, as if touching something dirty. A memento of what? Of poverty? Of grime? "This fabric looks like a kitchen towel. It smells damp, like mothballs. It smells like misery. Exactly like you." Helen clutched the fabric tightly. "It's very valuable to me. I wore it to celebrate my son's wedding." Jessica let out a laugh, a sharp, unpleasant sound that bounced off the bare walls of the room. "The wedding? You mean that ridiculous thing you did on your farm?" "Please." "Michael's real wedding was with me, at an exclusive club with important people. You weren't invited to that wedding, and you never would be, dressed in this servant's costume." She snatched the dress from her hands. Helen tried to get it back, but Jessica pushed her back, causing her to stumble and fall onto the bed. She held the dress up, examining it under the light. "It's unbelievable that you keep this piece of junk. It's an insult to Michael. It's a constant reminder that he comes from the mud. But don't worry, I know how to fix it." She left the room for a moment and returned with a bottle of perfume from her vanity. It was an expensive perfume, one of the many Michael gave her. It had an intense, floral, and overwhelmingly sweet fragrance. "This needs a touch of class, a bit of civilization," she said, with a malevolent smile, and began to spray the dress with the perfume. Not once or twice. She emptied almost half the bottle onto the cotton fabric, soaking it. The pungent scent filled the room, an artificial and aggressive aroma that took over everything. It was an act of desecration, a violation. She was staining her purest memory with the scent of her empty opulence. "No, please, Jessica, no," Helen begged, trying to get up. "Shut up. I'm doing you a favor. We're having a very important party in this house soon. Michael's most important business partners are coming. And you know what? I was thinking of letting you out of your cave for a while, so you can see what the real world is like. You could wear this dress now that it doesn't stink of poverty, but of money. Though you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." She left the sentence hanging in the air, savoring her own cruelty. She threw the damp, sticky dress in her face. The cold fabric, soaked in perfume, stuck to Helen's skin. The smell was so strong it made her nauseous. Jessica looked at her one last time, a look of absolute triumph. "Enjoy your treasure. It's worth a little more now." She left the room, slamming the door shut. Helen was left alone, trembling. She pulled the dress from her face and looked at it. The blue color was darkened by the damp perfume stains, but the worst part was the smell. The scent of her home was lost forever, replaced by that synthetic, suffocating fragrance. It was the smell of Jessica, the smell of humiliation. She held the desecrated dress in her hands, and for the first time since she had arrived, she cried. She cried with deep, heart-wrenching sobs, for her dress, for her son, for her stolen life. She cried until she had no tears left, until the only taste in her mouth was bitterness, and the only smell in the air was that of her desecrated treasure. The mansion transformed into a beehive of frantic activity in the days leading up to the party. Catering trucks came and went. Florists decorated every corner with extravagant arrangements, and an army of cleaning staff polished every surface until it gleamed. Jessica supervised everything like a general on a battlefield, her tablet in one hand and her phone in the other, barking orders, criticizing, humiliating. Her stress level translated into increased cruelty, and every employee, from the gardener to the cook, felt the lash of her sharp tongue. Helen was relegated to the most thankless tasks. She was put to polishing dozens of sets of silver cutlery until her fingers were numb. She had to scrub the service patio floor on her knees and clean the employees' bathrooms. They kept her busy, exhausted, and above all, out of sight. She was a shadow that glided through the service hallways, invisible to the dazzling world being constructed in the main part of the house. On the night of the party, just as the first guests began to arrive and the soft music of a string quartet floated in the air, Jessica came to find her in her room. She wore a long, fitted red dress that made her look like an elegant and dangerous flame. Her diamond jewelry sparkled with a cold light. She found Helen sitting on the edge of her bed, staring into space. "Listen to me carefully, because I'm not going to repeat myself," Jessica began, her voice low and devoid of any emotion. "Tonight is the most important night of the year for Michael's career. People who can decide our future will be here. I will not allow anything or anyone to ruin it. Understood?" Helen nodded silently, without looking up. "You will stay locked in this room. I've given orders to the guards to watch this hallway. I don't want to hear a single sound. I don't want to see your shadow under the door. I don't want you to breathe too loudly. You are going to disappear. You will become nothing." She approached her, crouching down so their gazes were at the same level. The perfume she was wearing was the same one she had sprayed on the blue dress. It made Helen's stomach churn. "If you disobey," Jessica continued, her words like daggers, "if I even think you've tried to leave, I swear on everything you hold dear that I won't wait for morning. I'll have you dragged out in the middle of the party. I will throw you out onto the street with what you're wearing, in the middle of the night, in front of all my guests. And I'll make sure every one of them knows you're a crazy, senile old woman who tried to attack me. I will make Michael so ashamed of you that he will never speak your name again. Am I perfectly clear?" The threat was so detailed, so laden with venom, that it paralyzed Helen. It wasn't just the fear of being thrown out. It was the total annihilation of her identity and her relationship with her son that terrified her. She nodded again, this time with a barely perceptible movement. "Good," Jessica said, standing up. She smoothed her dress. "I'm glad we understand each other. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go be the perfect hostess. Enjoy your evening." She left and closed the door. Helen heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock from the outside. No longer a guest, not even a servant, but a prisoner in her own son's home. Jessica thinks she has won. But in that dark, locked room, she may have just given Helen the one thing she didn't have before, nothing left to lose. She was locked in, a prisoner in her own son's house. The hours passed slowly. The sounds of the party were a torture that filtered through the door. She heard the music, which grew more lively as the night went on. She heard the laughter, loud and carefree, from people living in a universe alien to hers. She heard the clinking of glasses, the applause after a speech she couldn't understand, and sometimes she thought she could distinguish Michael's voice, laughing too. Each sound was a needle piercing her heart, reminding her of her loneliness, her exclusion. She sat in the darkness, having not even bothered to turn on the light. The initial fear that had left her petrified began to transform. Fear gave way to sadness, and sadness to a deep, dull rage. Not rage against Jessica, but against her own powerlessness. How had she let things get to this point? At what moment had she lost her son in this way? Jessica's words came back to her. "I will make Michael so ashamed of you." And in that sentence, she found something a spark. It wasn't a plan, not a strategy. It was a visceral need, a rebellion of the soul. The fear of Michael being ashamed of her was terrible, but the certainty that he was living a lie, ignorant of the monster he slept with, was even worse. She couldn't remain a ghost. She couldn't simply disappear. The love for her son, a wounded and battered love, but still immense, began to push her. Not to confront Jessica, not to cause a scandal, but to make one last attempt at connection, however fleeting it might be. She got up from the edge of the bed. Her movements were slow, deliberate. The seed of defiance, planted by cruelty and watered by desperation, had begun to sprout. She walked to the small suitcase lying in a corner like a beaten dog. She opened it. Inside, folded with almost religious care, was the blue dress. The smell of cheap, expensive perfume still permeated the fabric, a reminder of the desecration. But underneath that artificial layer, Helen could still smell, or perhaps just remember, the scent of her home. She took it out and held it in front of her in the dim light. Her decision was made. She would not stay there waiting for her spirit to be extinguished in the darkness. Putting on the dress was an act of silent rebellion. The fabric felt strange against her skin, cold from the lack of warmth in the room and heavy with the sickly sweet, nauseating scent of Jessica's perfume. It was like wearing the badge of her own humiliation. But as she fastened the buttons with clumsy fingers, something inside her changed. She was no longer the trembling victim sitting in the dark. By putting on the dress, she was reclaiming a part of herself, the only part Jessica hadn't managed to completely destroy, her identity as Michael's mother. Once dressed, she approached the locked door. She pressed her ear against the cold wood, listening to the sounds of the party. They were a tide of noise and energy. She knew Jessica had locked her in. She rattled the doorknob. It was firm. Panic began to set in. But then she looked at the simple, old-fashioned lock on the service room door. It was a privacy lock, not a deadbolt. With her heart hammering in her chest, she looked around. In the country, you learn to fix everything with what you have on hand. She found a small, sturdy paperclip on the desk in the corner. She bent it straight, inserted the metal tip into the small hole in the center of the knob, and pushed. After a moment of fumbling, she heard a small click. The door had opened. The service hallway was deserted and dimly lit. She moved, sticking close to the wall, her breath held, feeling like a thief in her own home. Every step on the cold tiles seemed to echo like thunder in the corridor's silence. Her goal was a swinging door at the end of the hall. The one she knew led directly into the grand ballroom where the party was being held. Her plan was simple, almost childish in its desperation. She didn't want to be seen. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She just wanted to peek through the crack, see her son for a moment, fill her eyes with his image, and then retreat to her cell with that small comfort. She reached the door. The noise on the other side was overwhelming. With infinite care, she pushed it open just a few inches, enough to create a small opening. The flash of light and color dazzled her. She saw a sea of elegant people, evening gowns, tuxedos, jewels sparkling under the light of the chandeliers. They held champagne glasses and laughed with their mouths wide open. For a moment, panic seized her. It was such a foreign, intimidating world. What was she doing there in her cotton dress and with her farmhand's hands? Then she saw him. He was in the center of a group near the fireplace. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. He had a glass in his hand and was smiling as he listened to an older man who was gesturing animatedly. He looked handsome, successful, powerful. He looked happy. And seeing him like that, in his element, a sharp and complex pain shot through Helen. It was the immense pride of a mother seeing her son succeed, mixed with the heartbreaking sadness of knowing that this success had left her behind, in the darkness of a service hallway. She stood there, drinking in his image, memorizing the gesture of his hand, the way his hair fell across his forehead. It was her Mikey, her boy, trapped inside the successful man. A wave of love so fierce and protective washed over her, momentarily drowning her fear. He just doesn't know, her heart whispered. He doesn't know what she is. If I could just warn him, just for a second. It was this thought, this last, desperate flicker of a mother's protective instinct that kept her there a second too long. That small glimpse was all she needed, but it was a glimpse she held for too long. She was about to retreat, to close the door and return to her confinement, when a woman passing near the door saw her. The woman, wearing a silver dress, stopped and looked at her strangely. She didn't say anything, but her expression of, "And who is this?" was enough. She frowned, looked at Helen's blue dress, so out of place in that setting, and then glanced at one of her friends, raising an eyebrow. That small gesture was a ripple that spread across the water. The friend looked, then another person. A small circle of silence and curiosity began to form near the service door, and Jessica, with her predator's instinct, sensed it. She was on the other side of the room, charming a potential investor, but her radar for anything out of place was infallible. Her gaze swept the room and stopped at the small point of disruption. She saw the curious glances, and then, through the gap, she saw the unmistakable blue color of Helen's dress. Her smile froze. That's the look. The moment the hunter spots the prey, Helen's small, desperate act of love has just backfired, and she has no idea what she's truly unleashed. Jessica's perfect party is about to turn into a stage, and she is planning to make Helen the star of a public execution. Keep listening, because this is the moment the entire story explodes. For a fraction of a second, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Excusing herself from the investor, she began to move across the room. She didn't run. She walked with a terrifying speed and determination, like a guided missile. People moved out of her way, sensing the dangerous energy emanating from her. Helen saw her approaching. Panic paralyzed her completely. Her plan had shattered. She wanted to back away, close the door, run, but her feet seemed nailed to the floor. Jessica reached the door and threw it wide open with a violent shove. The light from the ballroom flooded the hallway, exposing Helen in all her humble and terrified figure. "What do you think you're doing?" Jessica hissed, her voice so low only Helen could hear it, but laden with all the fury of hell. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed her by the arm with surprising strength. Her nails dug into Helen's skin like claws. "I warned you," she muttered, her breath hot and venomous in Helen's face. And then she began to drag her. She pulled her out of the service hallway and pushed her into the center of the ballroom. The music stopped abruptly. The conversation ceased. 100 pairs of eyes turned towards them. The silence that fell was total, heavy, and expectant. Helen stumbled, nearly falling, humiliated under the gaze of all those strangers. Across the room, she saw Michael's face. His smile was gone. In its place was an expression of absolute confusion and bewilderment. Their eyes met over the heads of the guests. Helen's heart screamed his name in silence, a desperate plea. But before anyone could move or speak, Jessica raised her voice, projecting it to resonate in every corner of the silenced room. Her face transformed, adopting an expression of a terrified victim. "Look, everyone!" she shouted, her voice trembling with perfect falsehood. "Look at the beggar who stalks me, the one who came to my house to ruin my life." Jessica's voice exploded in the room, an artificial thunder in a sky of glass and whispers. "Look at the beggar who stalks me, the one who came to my house to ruin my life." The silence that followed was instant, a vacuum that absorbed the sound of the music and conversations. Helen, her arm caught in an iron grip, was dragged from the dimness of the service hallway into the harsh light of the party's center. She stumbled, her simple shoes slipping on the Persian rug, and felt the heat of 100 curious gazes on her like a burning coal. "Let me go, Jessica. You're hurting me," Helen exclaimed, trying to break free. Her voice, though trembling, had an edge of indignation. Jessica ignored her, turning her to face the crowd. Her face was a mask of tragedy for her guests, but the eyes that bored into Helen shone with a savage triumph. "I beg you to forgive me," Jessica proclaimed, her voice vibrating with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of our success, of my husband's work. But this woman has come to destroy everything." "That's a lie," Helen retorted, planting her feet firmly. "I haven't come to destroy anything. I came to see my son." "To see your son?" Jessica mocked, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "You've been harassing us for weeks on the phone, demanding money you claim is yours, telling anyone who will listen that we've abandoned you in misery." The accusation was so absurd, so far from reality, that it took Helen's breath away. She saw Tiffany Anderson, Jessica's most loyal friend, nod vehemently. "It's true," Tiffany shouted from her spot near the bar, making sure everyone heard her. "Jessica has told us about the hell she's living through because of this lady. You are so brave, my friend, for putting up with so much." The chorus of support emboldened Jessica. She leaned toward Helen, her perfumed breath a poison in her face. "Your little show is over, old woman. Tonight, everyone will know who you really are." With surprising strength, Jessica began to drag her again, this time not toward the center, but toward the grand marble fireplace, where the most important guests were seated, including Michael's most important business partner, Mr. Charles Warren, and his wife, Catherine. Helen resisted, digging her heels into the carpet. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you, you snake," she shouted, her rage finally overcoming her fear. The struggle became a grotesque spectacle. Jessica pulled. Helen clung to the leg of a chair. "Security!" Jessica screamed. "Someone call security! This woman is out of control." Two uniformed guards who were at the entrance began to move, but Mr. Warren raised a hand. "One moment," he said, his deep voice commanding order. "We're not going to turn this into a circus. Jessica, let her go." Jessica, surprised by the intervention, released Helen with a shove. Helen staggered but didn't fall. She stood, panting, her dress stained and her hair disheveled, but with her head held high. "Thank you, sir," Helen said in a firm voice to Mr. Warren. Before turning to Jessica now, "Tell these people the truth. Tell them how you locked me in the service room. Tell them how you mocked my food and my clothes. Tell them how you desecrated this dress with your cheap perfume." The counter-accusation caught Jessica by surprise. For an instant, her victim mask cracked. "You're delusional. You're making things up to make yourself interesting," she exclaimed, her voice a little higher than usual. But Helen didn't stop. "I'm not making anything up. You're the one living a lie, a house of luxury built on my son's back, whom you have alienated from his roots and his blood. You're ashamed of me because you're ashamed that he comes from the earth, from hard work, from humility." Helen's words, charged with an undeniable truth, began to sow doubt in some faces. Catherine Warren looked at her husband with a raised eyebrow. Jessica felt she was losing control of the narrative. She needed a dramatic effect, something that would put her back in the victim role. She saw a waiter pass with a tray of drinks. "Young man," she called with sudden sweetness. The boy approached nervously. Jessica took 2 glasses of red wine. She turned to Helen with an icy smile. "You seem very upset, mother-in-law. Perhaps a glass of wine will help you calm down." She offered her the glass, her tone a veiled insult. "I don't want anything from you," Helen replied, looking away. "Oh, come on, don't be rude." "A toast," Jessica insisted, bringing the glass closer to Helen's lips. Helen pushed it away with a swat of her hand, and that was exactly what Jessica had been waiting for. With a sharp cry, Jessica accidentally stumbled backward, spilling the contents of both glasses onto the chest of the blue dress. The red wine soaked the fabric, a dark, obscene stain that spread quickly. "Look what you've done," Jessica screamed. "Now you've really crossed the line. Not only do you reject me, but you assault me." The scene was perfectly staged. To those farther away, it looked as if Helen had violently pushed Jessica. Helen looked at the huge stain on her dress, the second desecration of the night, and felt a part of her break. "You're a monster," she whispered, tears finally welling up in her eyes. "No, I'm a survivor," Jessica retorted in a low voice before raising her voice again. "I can't take it anymore. I can't go on living with this fear, with this harassment." And then, in a fit of rage that seemed genuine but was the climax of her plan, she lunged at Helen. She didn't aim for her face or her arms. She aimed for the dress. Helen screamed and tried to protect it, but Jessica was blinded by hatred and adrenaline. She grabbed the wine-soaked fabric with both hands. First, she ripped a sleeve, the sharp sound causing several guests to step back. "You like this rag so much?" Jessica growled, struggling with the old woman. "Well, I'm going to take it away from you forever." Helen, in a reflex act of pure desperation, raised a hand and slapped her. The sound of the palm against Jessica's cheek echoed throughout the room. Time froze. Jessica touched her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her lips. "Now we're talking," she whispered. "You gave me everything I needed." With the strength of a beast, she grabbed the neckline of the dress and pulled. The fabric, weakened by the wine and the violence, offered no resistance. The sound of the cotton ripping was brutal, final, a sound of annihilation. It tore in two from top to bottom. This is it, the final, brutal act of annihilation, right in front of everyone. As Jessica stands in triumph, she has no idea that the one person who can end this all is about to walk through that door. "Don't go anywhere." Helen was left on her knees, trembling, the dress hanging from her body like a shroud. The cold of humiliation was unbearable, and from her gut came a cry that was more than a word. It was the sound of a heart being torn from her chest. "Don't rip my dress. It's the only thing I have left from your wedding." The cry, filled with a pain so pure and absolute, hung in the air, a final accusation in the dead silence that had fallen over the party. And at that precise moment, as Jessica stood triumphant with shreds of fabric in her hands, the heavy oak front door swung wide open. The cool night breeze entered with Michael Thompson, a harbinger of the chill that was about to settle into his life. Outside on the driveway, he had clapped the head of security on the back. "Everything in order, Frank?" "Everything's perfect, Mr. Thompson. Your wife has organized a spectacular party," the man had replied with a smile. The irony was so thick, it was almost comical. Michael walked into the foyer, his mind full of contract figures and the glint of the diamonds he carried in his pocket. His smile was that of a man who feels he is the king of the world, not knowing his kingdom was in flames. The first thing that hit him wasn't the silence, but a face. One of the guests, a young woman named Ashley, was rushing out of the ballroom, her face pale and her eyes wide. Seeing him, she stopped short. "Michael, thank God. You have to go in. Something terrible is happening. Jessica, your mother." The woman couldn't finish the sentence. She put a hand to her mouth and ran toward the exit, as if fleeing the scene of a crime. Michael's heart leaped. His mother? What did she have to do with it? He dropped the flowers and the gift on a console table in the foyer and ran toward the ballroom. He stopped at the entrance archway, and the world tilted on its axis. The scene was a Goya painting rendered in pastel colors. 100 people dressed in their finest seemed frozen in time, their faces turned toward the center of the room. The silence was so deep he could hear the hum of the electricity in the chandeliers. And then he saw her, his mother, on her knees. Her blue dress, the one he remembered so vividly from his childhood, the one she had worn for every special occasion in their small town, was torn to shreds, hanging from her frail body. Her white hair was disheveled, and her face, the face that had looked at him with unconditional love his entire life, was disfigured by a pain he couldn't comprehend. A few feet away, like a Valkyrie on the battlefield, stood Jessica. Her red dress was a splash of blood against the pale scene. She was panting, and in her hands, she held the shreds of blue fabric. Her posture was not that of a victim, it was that of a predator over its prey. Michael's mind fragmented. The pieces didn't fit. He saw his partner, Mr. Warren, who was looking at him with a sternly disapproving expression. He saw Tiffany, Jessica's friend, who seemed to be vibrating with malicious excitement. He saw a young couple, the Millers, who were looking at his mother with obvious pity but didn't dare to move. He took a step into the room, and that simple movement seemed to break the spell. The murmuring began, a wave of whispers that enveloped him. "It's Michael. Look at his face. He doesn't know what to do." He felt the heat of shame rise up his neck. His first instinct was to run to his mother, to lift her up, cover her, get her out of there. It was a physical impulse, the primal need to protect the woman who gave him life. But before he could take a second step, Jessica saw him, and in the blink of an eye, the predator transformed into the wounded doe. Her face crumpled into a mask of terror. She dropped the pieces of fabric as if they were burning, and with a heart-wrenching cry, ran toward him. "Michael, my love, you're here." She placed herself between him and his mother, blocking his path, blocking his line of sight. She threw herself into his arms, clinging to him with desperate strength. Michael caught her out of pure instinct, his arms wrapping around her trembling body while his mind was still short-circuiting. "Jessica, what the hell happened here?" he managed to say, his voice hoarse with shock. "It was her, Michael. It was her," Jessica sobbed against his chest. "Your mother. She came to ruin everything. She went crazy." While Jessica began to weave her web of lies, on the other side of the room, the young Miller couple, overcoming their fear, approached Helen. "Ma'am, let us help you," the wife said in a low voice, offering her coat to cover up. "Don't touch her." Jessica screamed from Michael's arms, her voice suddenly strong and authoritative. "Don't go near her, she's dangerous. She just attacked me." The Millers recoiled, frightened by the warning. The scene was perfectly divided. On one side, Jessica, the supposed victim, protected in the arms of her powerful husband. On the other, Helen, the supposed aggressor, isolated in her pain, with people fearing her. Michael felt his wife's body tremble, heard her sobs, and then saw people step back at her warning. The confusion in his mind was a whirlwind. He didn't know what to believe, what to think, what to do. He only knew he was at the center of a catastrophe, and that with every passing second, the abyss grew deeper and deeper. Jessica lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes fixed on his, and began to speak, her voice a sweet, convincing poison that began to drip directly into his soul. With Michael as her anchor and the room as her jury, Jessica deployed her full arsenal of manipulation. Her body trembled in his arms, but her mind was cold and sharp as the diamond on her finger. She knew that Michael's initial disbelief was her biggest obstacle, and she had to demolish it with an avalanche of details, emotions, and proof. "My love, you have to hear the whole story," she began, her voice a broken whisper, forcing Michael to lean in to hear her, creating a bubble of intimacy in the midst of the chaos. "She arrived an hour ago. No one was expecting her. She came in through the kitchen, screaming your name. The staff tried to stop her, but she pushed them. She said this house was hers, that she came to claim what belongs to her." Michael frowned. "Claim what? Mom has never been like that." "I know, my love. I'm in shock too," Jessica replied, stroking his cheek. "But people change. Loneliness, bitterness. They've turned her into someone else. When she came into the ballroom, she was unrecognizable. She started walking among the guests, accosting them. She turned slightly and pointed to Catherine Warren. She told Catherine that her necklace was cheap junk, that women like her only knew how to spend the money that men like you and her husband earned. Catherine turned pale. "Is that right, Catherine?" Mrs. Warren, resentful of the scandal and loyal to the hostess of her circle, nodded stiffly. It was very unpleasant, a total lack of respect. The corroboration, though solicited, gave Jessica's lie a veneer of truth. Michael looked at Catherine, then at his mother, who was still standing, now alone again, watching the scene with an expression of disbelief. "I tried to intervene," Jessica continued, recapturing Michael's attention. "I took her aside, offered her a glass of water, and begged her to calm down. I said, 'Mother-in-law, let's talk tomorrow. We'll sort out whatever is bothering you.' But it was like talking to a wall. She accused me of holding you hostage, of being a witch who had cast a spell on you." Helen, hearing the string of lies, found her voice. "That's not true, son. Look at me," she cried, her voice laden with a desperation that was misinterpreted as hysteria. "She locked me up. She threw the wine on me. Liar, do you see?" Jessica exclaimed, shrinking into Michael's arms as if Helen's words were physical blows. "She's been like this all night. She goes from calm to fury in a second. She's an expert manipulator. She's trying to turn you against me." "You are the manipulator," Helen retorted, taking a step forward. "Tell the truth, Jessica. Tell my son the truth." This was the moment Jessica had been waiting for. As Helen advanced, Jessica screamed, "Don't you come near him!" She threw her arms forward as if to protect Michael, and in the quick, confusing movement, she scratched her own neck with her nails, a rehearsed, precise motion. The pain was a small electric shock. Immediately after, she brought her hand to her neck with a whimper of pain. She's attacked me again, she cried, pulling her hand away to reveal the fresh scratches. Michael, look! I told you. She's violent. The evidence appearing in the middle of the confrontation was devastating. It seemed like a direct reaction to Helen's aggression. Michael looked at the scratches, the blood welling up slightly, and then at his mother, who had stopped in her tracks, horrified by the accusation. No, I didn't, Helen stammered. That's enough! Michael roared, his voice for the first time sounding with thundering authority. The room fell into an even deeper silence. He detached himself from Jessica and walked toward his mother. For a moment, Helen thought he was coming to listen to her, but the expression on his face was one of icy fury. What is wrong with you, Mom? He said, his voice low and tense. Have you gone crazy? You come to my house to make this scene? To attack my wife? No, son. For the love of God, listen to me. It's a trap. She planned it all, Helen pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. A trap? So I also imagine the scratches on her neck? The insults to my guests? Your torn dress? She tore it. She did it all. And why would she do that, Mom? Tell me, what reason would Jessica have for doing something so insane? It was the trick question. Any answer Helen could give, jealousy, hatred, evil, would sound like resentful paranoia. She was trapped. The perverse logic of the situation was on Jessica's side. I don't know, Helen admitted in a whisper, because she is full of malice. Michael let out a bitter, joyless laugh. That's not an answer, Mom. It's a desperate accusation. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the world on his shoulders. I've heard enough. He turned away, leaving his mother with the words caught in her throat. He returned to Jessica's side and hugged her, this time with a protective firmness. The gesture was a public declaration. He had chosen, and his choice, sealed by a masterfully woven web of lies, resonated in the room like the strike of a gavel. Michael's embrace of Jessica was the signal everyone had been waiting for. The crisis had a designated culprit. Mr. Warren nodded in approval. Tiffany Anderson smiled with satisfaction, and Helen felt as if the floor beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. Her son, her own blood, had turned his back on her in front of the entire world. Michael ignored her for a long moment, comforting Jessica, whispering reassuring words in her ear. It was a performance for the audience, a way to solidify his decision. Then he separated from his wife and addressed the crowd with the voice of a CEO managing a corporate crisis. Friends, partners, on behalf of myself and my wife, I offer our sincerest apologies for this regrettable incident. It is clear that my mother is not well. This is a private family matter that has unfortunately become public. I ask for your understanding. The party will continue. Please, enjoy the evening. The statement was cold, calculated. It reduced the tragedy to an incident, his mother's pain to a health matter. It was a masterpiece of damage control. He turned and walked back to Helen. This time his face showed neither fury nor confusion, only a weary and grim determination. Mom, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. This is over. You're going home. Home? Helen repeated, her voice a hollow echo. You're kicking me out, Michael. You're kicking me out of your house. I'm asking you to leave before you cause any more trouble, he corrected, his gaze as hard as a diamond. I'll call a taxi to take you to the bus station. The cruelty of the sentence hit her with the force of a physical blow. Not even to her town, to the bus station. Like a stranger, like a nuisance to be dispatched as quickly and efficiently as possible. I don't need your taxi, she said, a spark of pride flickering from the ashes of her humiliation. I can leave on my own. Fine, he replied, impassive. He took her by the arm. His grip was like a stranger's strong, but without warmth. I'll walk you to the door. He began to lead her away, and this time, Helen didn't resist. She walked with her head held high, her torn dress a banner of her pain. The aisle of people parted for them again. There was no longer curiosity in their faces, only the discomfort of witnessing a family execution. As they passed, she heard Jessica whisper to Tiffany, "Thank God the nightmare is over." They reached the front door. Michael opened it. The cold, silent night greeted them. Helen stopped on the threshold and turned to look at him. She wanted to burn into her memory the face of the son she had lost. "One day, Michael," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and firm, "you will realize what you have done tonight. One day, the truth will come out, and on that day, you will drown in your own guilt. And I don't know if I'll be there to forgive you." The prophecy, spoken with the authority of a broken heart, seemed to strike him. He saw a shadow of fear cross his eyes, but it was only for an instant. The loyalty to the lie he had chosen was stronger. "Goodbye, Mom," he said, and he took a step back. He closed the door, and the sound of the deadbolt was the final punctuation mark on their relationship. He chose the lie. In the one moment that mattered most, Michael turned his back on the woman who gave him life. It is the ultimate betrayal, but this story is not over. The truth is still hiding in that house, waiting to be found. Helen was left alone in the darkness. She didn't cry. She felt empty, hollow. She turned and began to walk down the long driveway of the mansion, toward the gate, toward a world that no longer contained her son. Inside, Michael leaned against the door, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He had done the unthinkable. He had chosen. Jessica approached and put a hand on his shoulder, a hand that now felt strange, possessive. "It's over, my love. You did the right thing," she said, her voice a serpent's caress. He didn't answer. He straightened up, adjusted the knot of his tie, and walked back to the heart of the party. The music had started again. People were talking, laughing, drinking again. The scandal had been contained. Order was restored. He took a glass of whiskey from a passing waiter and downed it in one gulp. The alcohol burned his throat, but couldn't reach the ice that had settled in his chest. He stood there, in the middle of his triumphant party, smiling, socializing, while his soul began to rot from the betrayal he had just committed. The days following Helen's expulsion devolved into a thick, suffocating fog inside the mansion. Jessica, having won the battle, now dedicated herself to consolidating her victory. She orchestrated a public relations campaign among her social circle, presenting herself as the long-suffering victim of a deranged mother-in-law. The calls from her friends were a constant stream of false compassion and venomous gossip. "How are you holding up, sweetie? What a nightmare you went through," Tiffany Anderson would say over the phone. "Don't even get me started," Jessica would reply with a perfectly rehearsed sigh. "Michael is devastated, but it was for the best." Sometimes love means making tough decisions, but the reality within the mansion's walls was very different. Michael wasn't devastated in a way Jessica could handle. He was absent. He moved through the rooms like an automaton, his eyes vacant and his face unreadable. The forced smiles he had worn at the end of the party had vanished, leaving behind a mask of cold apathy. They ate together at the enormous dining table in a glacial silence, interrupted only by the clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain. "My love, I've been thinking," Jessica said one morning during breakfast, trying to break the ice barrier. "We should take a trip for a few weeks, maybe to Europe, to relax, to forget this unpleasant incident." Michael didn't look up from his plate. "I don't have time for a vacation, Jessica. But it would do you good." "You're so tense," she insisted, reaching out to touch his hand. He pulled it away, as if the contact burned him. "I said no," he repeated, his voice flat and sharp. He stood up from the table, leaving his food half-eaten. "I have to work." He would lock himself in his office for hours, but he wasn't working. He would sit in his leather chair, staring at the wall with a glass of whiskey in his hand that he refilled again and again. The memory of his mother's eyes at the door haunted him. The doubt he had managed to suppress during the crisis now returned in waves, corroding Jessica's lie like acid. What if his mother was right? Could his wife, the woman who slept beside him, be capable of such monstrosity? The idea was so terrible that his mind resisted accepting it, but doubt, once planted, was a weed impossible to uproot. His doubt became an obsession. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't work. Jessica's story, which had seemed so convincing under pressure, now began to fray in his mind. He kept replaying the scene, the scratches that seemed too precise. Jessica's practiced terror, his mother's raw, desperate cries. He needed to know. The mansion was equipped with a state-of-the-art system that covered every exterior angle and the common areas inside. He went to the security room, a small, cold room in the basement, and sat in front of the wall of monitors. His hands trembled as he pulled up the footage from the grand ballroom from the night of the party. "I just need to be sure," he whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with dread. With a knot in his stomach, he clicked on the file for the ballroom camera. He needed to see. He needed to know. The recording began with guests arriving, the smiles, the hugs. He fast-forwarded, looking for the moment of the explosion. And then he saw it. He saw his mother entering the ballroom from the service door, not shouting, not drunk, but with a painful shyness, seeking just a glimpse. Then he saw Jessica. He saw her face transform. He saw how she marched toward his mother, how she dragged her. The audio, clear and crisp, picked up every word. He heard Jessica's lies, the accusations, and then he heard his mother, her voice clear and firm, defending herself, telling the truth. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. He rewound the video and played it again, turning up the volume. He saw the wine incident, the deliberate way Jessica had provoked the spill. He saw his mother's slap, an act of desperation, not aggression. And then he saw the final horror. He saw his wife's hands, her own hands, grabbing the dress. He saw the struggle, heard the sound of the fabric ripping, a sound that now, knowing the truth, was the sound of his own soul tearing in two. Rewind, play. He saw his mother scream, "It's the only thing I have left from your wedding." Rewind, play. He saw Jessica fake the attack. Rewind, play. He saw himself entering the room. He heard Jessica's string of lies, each word a poisoned dagger, and he saw himself believing her. He saw his own face harden, turn cold. He saw himself take his mother by the arm and throw her out into the night. A guttural roar, a sound of pure agony, erupted from his throat. He leaped to his feet, the chair clattering backward. The glass of whiskey he had brought with him smashed against the wall of monitors, the amber liquid dripping over the screens that displayed the undeniable truth. His wife's betrayal was monstrous, but his own blindness, his own cowardice, was unforgivable. He had chosen comfort over truth, image over blood. He had sold his soul for a castle of lies. He stormed out of the basement, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Jessica was in her walk-in closet, trying on a new dress in front of the mirror. "My love, what do you think? Do you think this is appropriate for the dinner at the club?" She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael entered the room and, without a word, ripped the tablet that controlled the security system from the wall and threw it at Jessica's feet. "Explain this," he said, his voice so low and full of rage that Jessica backed away, frightened. On the tablet screen, the scene of the torn dress repeated in a silent, accusatory loop. Jessica looked at the screen, then at Michael's eyes, and she knew the game was over. Her face turned pale. "Michael, I can explain. She provoked me. She pushed me over the edge. You don't know the things she said to me before." "I know everything," he interrupted her. "I've seen and heard every second. From the moment she arrived, from the pie in the trash, to your Oscar-worthy performance. I've seen every lie, every manipulation, and I saw you rip her dress with your own hands." Jessica tried one last resort, tears. "But I love you, Michael. Everything I do is for you, for us. Your mother wants to tear us apart. She's a threat to our marriage." "You are the only threat here," Michael said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are the poison, and I was the fool who drank it." He moved toward her, and for the first time Jessica was afraid of him. "Get out of my house, now." "What? You can't do this to me. This is my house too. I have rights." "You'll talk to my lawyers," he said, turning his back on her. "Pack your things. You have 1 hour. If you're still here when I get back, I'll call the same security you called to have you removed." He left the room, slamming the door with a force that made the mirrors tremble. Jessica was left alone amidst her designer dresses and her jewelry, her face contorted with fury and panic. The lie that had brought her to the top had just become the cliff from which she was about to fall. The game is over. All the power, the money, and the intricate lies can't save Jessica from the simple truth on that tape. But while her story ends here, the real journey, Michael's desperate search for redemption, is just beginning. The journey back was a silent procession through a landscape Helen didn't see. Sitting by the bus window, the shreds of her dress stored in a canvas bag, as if they were the relics of a martyred saint. She watched the fields and towns pass by without registering them. The pain she felt wasn't sharp and piercing like a fresh wound. It was a dull weight, an absence, as if a vital organ had been removed and the remaining void wouldn't stop aching. It wasn't Jessica's humiliation that tormented her. It was the image of the door closing, the sound of the deadbolt, the face of her son choosing the lie. That was the wound that didn't bleed, but was killing her from the inside. When the bus finally stopped in the dusty plaza of her town in New Mexico, the afternoon sun tinged the adobe walls of the church with orange. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, scents that had always meant home. But this time, she felt no comfort. She got off the bus and began to walk through the cobblestone streets, each step a monumental effort. Her lifelong neighbor, Patricia, a sturdy woman with a heart as big as her voice, saw her from her doorway. "Helen, my dear, you're back," she exclaimed, running to meet her with open arms. "How was it? Did you see my Mikey? Is he more handsome? Tell me everything." Patricia's hug was warm and sincere, but Helen couldn't return it. She stood rigid, a wooden post in her friend's arms. "It was fine, Patricia." "Michael is busy," she replied, her voice flat and lifeless. Patricia stepped back, her welcoming smile fading as she saw her friend's face. She saw the deep, dark circles, the paleness of her skin, and above all, the extinguished light in her eyes. "What's wrong with you, woman? Are you sick? You look like a ghost." "I'm just tired from the trip." "That's all," Helen lied, unable to share the magnitude of her pain. She said goodbye with a nod and continued on her way to her small house at the end of the street. The house greeted her with the silence of an abandoned place. Dust covered the furniture, and her geraniums in the yard had begun to wilt from lack of water. Everything seemed to be a reflection of her own interior, dry, neglected, lifeless. The first thing she did was go to her room and take the pieces of the blue dress from the bag. She spread them on her bed with infinite care, as if preparing a body for its funeral. She tried to smooth the wrinkles, to join the torn edges, but it was useless. The wound in the fabric was too big, too violent. She took her old sewing box, a rusty cookie tin filled with threads and needles. She threaded a needle with blue thread, the same she had used to sew it the first time. But when she tried to make the first stitch, her hands began to tremble. An uncontrollable tremor that was not from cold or old age. It was the trembling of her soul. The needle fell from her fingers. She tried again and again. Impossible. With a choked sob, she gathered the pieces of fabric, folded them with funereal reverence, and stored them in a wooden box that used to hold her finest threads. She put the box under her bed, as if burying her own heart. From that day on, Helen ceased to be Helen. She became a shadow inhabiting her own house. She stopped sewing, the craft that had been her livelihood and her passion. Her hands, once always busy, now lay still in her lap. She stopped tending her garden, and the flowers eventually died. She stopped going to the Sunday market, from chatting with the other women at the fountain. She would spend hours sitting in a rocking chair on her porch, her gaze lost on the horizon, waiting for something she knew would not come. Patricia, worried, visited her every day. She brought her a plate of hot soup, a sweet roll, some fruit. "You have to eat, Helen. You're going to waste away," she would say, her voice full of genuine anguish. Helen would eat a few bites just to please her friend. "Let's go to church, my dear. Praying will do you good," Patricia would insist. "I have nothing left to ask God for," Helen would reply, her voice a whisper. One afternoon, Patricia found her on the porch, more absent than ever. "For the love of God, Helen, what happened to you in that city? What did they do to you? You're not yourself. They've stolen your light. It was that woman of your son's. She treated you badly." Helen turned to look at her friend, and for the first time, Patricia saw a tear roll down the old woman's wrinkled cheek. "It wasn't her, Patricia," Helen said, her voice barely audible. "One can survive a stranger's humiliation. What kills you is the silence of the one you love most. She turned away and looked back at the dusty road, leaving Patricia with words unspoken and a heavy heart. She understood that her friend's wound was not of pride, but of love. And that was a wound that no hot soup or prayer could heal. Only time or a miracle could begin to mend it. But in Helen's soul, time had stopped, and miracles had ceased to exist. The weeks blurred into months. The seasons changed, the dust on her sewing machine grew thicker, but the scene at the party remained as vivid as if it were happening every minute. Her life became a waiting room of grief. She didn't wait for Michael to call. She knew he wouldn't. The son she knew was gone, swallowed by a life that had no room for her. This was the true long suffering, not the sharp sting of Jessica's cruelty, but the dull, endless ache of Michael's silence. The world had moved on, but Helen remained trapped in that cold hallway, her heart forever torn, like the blue dress hidden under her bed. After kicking Jessica out, Michael was left alone in the mansion, and the silence, once a blessing, became his worst enemy. Every empty room, every piece of luxury furniture, every work of art on the walls screamed his failure. The house, once the symbol of his success, was now the mausoleum of his betrayal. He spent 2 days locked inside with the curtains drawn, subsisting only on whiskey and guilt. He watched the party video over and over, torturing himself with every detail, with every cruel word from Jessica, with every tear from his mother. The initial rage against his now ex-wife dissipated, giving way to a much deeper and more corrosive hatred, self-hatred. On the 3rd day, dawn found him with bloodshot eyes and an unshakable resolve in his heart. He couldn't undo what he had done, but he couldn't continue living in the paralysis of guilt. He showered, shaved, and for the first time in days, put on clean clothes. Not a designer suit, but jeans and a simple shirt. He went down to the garage, ignoring the Ferrari and the Mercedes, and got into the old pickup truck he used to visit a friend's ranch. He drove without stopping. He left the city and drove into the heart of the country, leaving behind the asphalt and skyscrapers to immerse himself in the ochre landscapes. He drove with a feverish urgency, as if the motion could appease the torment in his mind. At one point, on a lonely highway surrounded by agave fields, the memory of his mother's face as he closed the door hit him with such force that he had to pull the truck over to the shoulder. He rested his head on the steering wheel and began to cry. These weren't the silent tears of guilt. They were the gut-wrenching sobs of a lost child, a cry that shook his entire body. He pounded the steering wheel with his fists again and again until his knuckles bled. The physical pain was a poor substitute for the pain in his soul. He arrived in the town at dusk. The place was exactly as he remembered from his few visits in recent years. Small, humble, and with a pace of life that seemed to belong to another century. He parked the truck near the plaza and walked, feeling like a stranger in the land of his birth. People looked at him with curiosity, recognizing in the prodigal son the millionaire who had forgotten his roots. He asked an old man sitting on a bench for his mother's house. The man looked at him with wise, sad eyes. The house is the same. The one who is no longer the same is her, he said, his tone a silent accusation. When he reached the end of the street, he saw her. She was sitting in the rocking chair on her porch, motionless, her gaze lost. His heart sank. The woman who was there was an empty shell. The vitality, the warmth, the light. It was all gone. She seemed to have aged 10 years in a few days. Patricia, coming out of Helen's house with an empty plate, saw him and stood in front of him like a lioness. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice thick with contempt. "Have you come to see the ruin you caused? Since she came back from your house, she's not even a shadow of her former self. You've killed her spirit, you ungrateful boy." "I know, Patricia. I know." That was all Michael could say, his voice choked. "Knowing doesn't fix anything. Go away. You have no business here." "I'm not leaving until I talk to her," Michael said, his determination unshakable. Patricia looked him in the eyes, saw the genuine pain, the desperation, and sighed, stepping aside. "May God forgive you, because I don't know if she can." Michael advanced slowly, each step on the packed dirt of the yard, a hammer blow to his conscience. His mother saw him approach, and for an instant, there was no reaction on her face. None. Not surprise, not anger, not joy. Just a bottomless void that was 1,000 times worse than hatred. He stopped a few feet from her. He opened his mouth to speak, to say, "Forgive me, I'm sorry. I made the worst mistake of my life." But the words refused to come out. What could words say in the face of such profound pain? They were useless, empty, an insult. And so he did the only thing his shattered heart dictated. He fell to his knees. He fell onto the humble earth that his mother had swept so many times, the same earth on which he had learned to walk. And there, at the feet of the woman he had betrayed, he broke. The cry that erupted from him was not human. It was the sound of a dam bursting, of years of emotional distance, of blind ambition, and of unbearable guilt being released all at once. He cried with convulsive sobs that racked his entire body. He buried his face in his mother's simple skirt, like a small child seeking refuge after a nightmare, not realizing that he himself was the cause of the nightmare. He didn't ask for forgiveness with words. He asked for forgiveness with every tear, with every tremor, with the total and abject surrender of his arrogance and his pain. Words mean nothing now. This is the only thing he could do, a complete, broken surrender at his mother's feet. But after so much pain, is a mother's love truly strong enough to forgive the unforgivable? He cried for the torn dress, for the closed door, for every call he didn't make, for every visit he postponed. He cried until he had no strength left, until his sobs turned into a silent whimper. Helen had remained motionless the entire time, like a statue of salt. But as she felt her son's tears soaking her skirt, something inside her, something she thought was dead and buried, began to stir. The ice that had formed around her heart began to crack. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her right hand, her hand calloused from decades of work and love, and with a gesture that contained the entire universe, she placed it on her son's bowed head. There was no caress, no words, just the weight of her hand, an anchor in the storm of his repentance. And that simple touch, in the silence of the New Mexico dusk, was the beginning of the long road back home. Michael's return to the town was not a visit. It was a relocation. The months that followed were a slow and painful process of demolition and reconstruction. The first demolition was that of his former life. He returned to the city one last time, not as the king of the mansion, but as its liquidator. He faced Jessica, who was waiting for him not with remorse, but with a team of lawyers. The legal battle was short and brutal. Michael, with no desire to fight for the money that now seemed tainted, ceded a considerable part of his fortune to her. "Take the money," he told her in their final meeting, his voice devoid of hatred, only of infinite weariness. "Buy yourself another life. Ours is over." Jessica took the money and disappeared, destined for a life of empty luxury, hopping from party to party, but with a bitterness in her soul that no expensive champagne could ever wash away, growing old alone with only the company of the ghosts of her own lies. Then Michael sold the mansion. He sold it with everything inside, the designer furniture, the works of art, the luxury cars. He kept only his clothes and a few personal items. The day he handed over the keys to the new owners, he felt no nostalgia, only liberation. As he walked away, he saw his reflection in one of the windows and barely recognized himself. His lawyers had one other task. He had them find Lily, the young employee his mother had tried to call. He learned she had been unable to find work due to Jessica's threats. Michael personally called her, apologized profusely, and set up a trust fund for her and her sick mother, enough to ensure they would never have to worry about money or Jessica's influence again. It was a small penance, a drop of water on a raging fire of guilt, but it was a start. The arrogant, ambitious man had been replaced by someone quieter, more somber, but infinitely more real. He simplified his businesses, delegating day-to-day control and keeping only a stake that guaranteed him a comfortable life, but without excesses. His empire no longer mattered to him. His only project, his only ambition, was to win back his mother's love. The reconstruction was much more difficult. He moved into a small guest house in the town, respecting his mother's space. He didn't arrive with expensive gifts or grand promises. He arrived with his hands and his time. He fixed the leaking roof of his mother's house. He revived the garden, planting new geraniums and rose bushes. He painted the faded walls. He did the grocery shopping, cooked for her, and sat beside her on the porch for hours, sometimes in silence, other times telling her simple stories about his day. At first, Helen treated him with a polite distance. She accepted his help, ate his food, but the light in her eyes remained dim. Forgiveness wasn't a switch that could be flipped. It was a plant that needed to be watered day after day with the consistency of repentance. Michael never asked for forgiveness with words again. He asked for it with every plate of food he served her, with every flower he planted, with every night he stayed up late just to make sure she was sleeping peacefully. One day, while cleaning out an old closet, Michael found the wooden box. He opened it and saw the pieces of the blue dress. The pain hit him again, as fresh as the first time. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. With the box in his hands, he embarked on a new journey. Asking around at craft markets, he eventually made his way to a small pueblo in the mountains of Arizona, famous for its weavers. There, he found an elderly woman named Master Weaver Elena, a Navajo woman whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Michael showed her the pieces of fabric. "I want you to restore it," he said. Elena took the shreds with an unexpected reverence. She examined them, feeling the texture, observing the original stitches. "This dress was not made with thread, young man. It was sewn with love," she said, her voice as soft as wool. "A wound like this cannot be simply patched. The soul of the fabric must be rewoven. It will require time and patience." "I have all the time in the world," Michael replied. For weeks, Michael traveled to Arizona to see the progress. He watched as Master Weaver Elena and her apprentices, with almost magical skill, not only joined the pieces, but reinforced the fabric with threads dyed the exact same color, using an ancestral technique called invisible mending. The wound, the scar from the tear, didn't disappear, but was transformed into a line of strength, a seam that was, as the artisan had said, stronger than the original fabric. He returned to New Mexico on his mother's birthday. That morning, for the first time, she had smiled at him. A small, fragile, but real smile. In the afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Michael handed her a large, flat box. She opened it. Inside, resting on tissue paper, was the blue dress. It was whole. The wine stain was gone. The scar from the tear was almost imperceptible, a delicate line that told a story of pain and redemption. Helen's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears that cleansed, that healed. "Put it on, Mom," Michael whispered. Helen finally witnessed an eternal truth. Cruelty, no matter how glamorous or powerful, will eventually self-destruct under its own weight. She realized that her dignity and her love, much like the blue dress, could be stained and torn, but their essence could never be destroyed. They could be restored, becoming even stronger once mended. Therefore, never let another's contempt define your worth. Know that true love and self-respect are the only things that cannot be thrown in the trash. Enduring love will always find its way home. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel to discover more profound life lessons.